Welcome to the Triclinium, a podcast named after the three-sided table used in the Lord's Supper, where you are invited to join the three of us as we think through matters of Christian faith, practice, and community. My name is Nate Lead, and I'm here, as always, with my co-hosts Eric Burgers and Jacob Hawley. And I just wanted to get us started. This is going to be a bit more of a free-form conversation. It's been a couple weeks since we last talked, so I would love to hear from you guys. What are some books or authors or ideas that have approached you, or that you have been thinking through these last couple of weeks? And let's just start there.
Yeah, that's good. We were both quiet, and I was pointing at Eric because I know what Eric's been reading.
Neither Eric nor Jacob wanted to go, so this is going to be a juicy one.
Oh man.
I am not prepared to defend what I'm reading against you. I got far more reading to do before because I'm not settled.
That's
on
okay.
the matter. Actually, maybe
we are not professionals.
Maybe I could say what I'm reading and we could talk through it because that's
what I was gonna say. Is you don't have to defend it. I mean, if you haven't picked a point, you don't have to die on this hill. This is not the Olympics. This is not
I'm not saying I'm gonna die on the hill, but
welcome back to the 22nd Ecumenical Council.
Sorry, Jacob, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Now you're gonna try to throw it back. All right, fine.
You were talking.
I will tell you. So, let's see. What have I been reading? I've been reading a couple of things. I glossed through a book by Robert Jensen called "Can These Bones Live?" I think it's like a theology in outline or something or dogmatics in outline. And that was an interesting read. I'm trying to get more familiar with Jensen's theology. He's a Lutheran pastor, but I think in his own words, he would say he's like I'm an unreliable Lutheran. So like he's kind of a, what you would say, an innovator in the Lutheran world. He's not necessarily dogmatic, or like we said in a couple episodes ago, he's more on the explorative side than the dogmatic side.
I was gonna say innovator. The Lutherans must dislike him greatly.
Well, it depends on which side you're listening to, right?
Yeah, sure.
But he was a disciple of, oddly enough, Bart and Jonathan Edwards. Both Bart and Jonathan Edwards. Yeah, so interesting combination there. And
yes.
I've been reading this other book that's been comparing Jonathan Edwards and Bart, and actually there are a lot of similarities in their thought. Usually Bart is the more explorative of the two, and he's willing to say things a little bit further than Jonathan Edwards was. But Jonathan Edwards, like if you take traditional Reformed dogmatics like Calvin's theology, at least as far as I understand it, and you kind of plot the map on where things are headed in their theological trajectory, I think that like you can almost draw a line from Calvin toward Jonathan Edwards, and then maybe, this might be too far to say, but maybe in certain areas you could draw them from Jonathan Edwards to Bart, even though I'm not sure that they had ever read each other, or obviously Jonathan Edwards never read Bart, but Bart I don't think had read much Jonathan Edwards. And so it's just an interesting book to kind of see how two Reformed theologians on different continents innovated in interesting ways and kind of developed Reformed theology. I've been reading very slightly. I've read some of Karl Barth's Epistle to the Romans. I'm reading that with a student right now. So I've read a little bit of that, and I could go to that and find some interesting quotes for us to talk about today. And then I was talking to the boys earlier. I've been reading a little bit of The Critical Journey, which is kind of a book on spiritual formation and kind of categorizes the stages in spiritual formation. Let's see. And then I've been listening to lots of podcasts and stuff. So yeah, I think that's the stuff that's been hitting recently. Eric, what about you? Where have you been reading/listening to?
Yeah, thankfully, reading has slowed down
a bit for me because I've been a bit overwhelmed recently with everything going on in life.
Sure.
Which, it's kind of bittersweet because I do enjoy reading, but I just like church history so much. I wish I had all the time in the world just to read more historical figures.
Yeah.
I have like a loose interest in the church fathers and patristics as well, so I'd love to read some more there. But so yeah, anyways, that all to say, I finished up in my Old Testament 1 class, so of course I did a lot of reading from the Old Testament in general, and then secondary sources commenting. I read one commentary on Nehemiah, and also a kind of overview book of the Old Testament that's going to continue on into another Old Testament class. So a lot of reading about the Old Testament, historical contexts and things like that. And then the other class that I'm in at the moment is an ethics class, and for that one, the professor, really sharp guy, really really great guy too. He's very sympathetic, I guess you could say, to natural law. So we have, kind of, we read like a bunch of articles, kind of revolving around natural law and how that's kind of played out for different folks, I guess you could say. And then how Go ahead.
Would you give a loose description of what natural law is for people who may not know?
Yeah. The way that I understand natural law, as it's been proposed to me, is that God has created the world. He's given a specific order to the world. Humanity has fallen away from the original order in which the world was created, and Jesus has kind of bridged the gap between that falling away and original order. So natural law says that we need to be able to... how do I put this? Natural law kind of says that we can understand the order of the world through reason, I guess you could say. And because we can understand the natural world through reason, we can kind of understand how to... And you have to keep in mind that I'm kind of seeing natural law through an ethical lens at the moment, so I only have a certain amount of understanding for natural law, but ethically speaking, we do ethics by basing, giving good reason to order how we do things based on the way God ordered the world. So I'm trying to think of a practical example that can make this a little bit more clear.
I think birth control is a really good example for this. Like, this is right down that alley.
Yeah, I've been wrestling through that one. Maybe that could be a good topic of conversation. So I'll let me try to do my best to lay out this example, and this will hopefully give a better picture of what natural law tries to do. So, Jacob mentioned birth control. Under a natural law kind of lens, I suppose you could say, birth control should be rejected by Christians. Now, why would I say that? The reason being, birth control is preventing something, particularly conception of a child, right? The reason that would be wrong is because of the way God ordered the world. So somebody who holds to natural law is going to go back to Genesis. Genesis is pivotal in understanding natural law in its entirety. So
why?
Because it shows the way that God ordered the world from the beginning. So
yeah.
So anyways, when you go back to Genesis and you look through the way that God created male and female, he created male and female, and he gave intercourse, sexual intercourse, as something that male and female can do together as an act of love. However, it doesn't just stop there. When you're reading through Genesis, that male and female only has intercourse, and that's the only part of that particular process. Somebody holding to natural law would say childbearing, beyond that, the possibility for conception is also a part of the way that God ordered sex to be in the first place. Therefore, when we prevent part of the natural process of sex, when we're preventing an aspect that God designed it to be, we're in error there. That would be effectually, I guess, a sin, you could say, because you're preventing the way that God ordered a particular act. So how does that relate to reason, I guess you could say? You use reason to argue back to how God ordered things in the first place. So we find ourselves here in America, and contraception is a really widely accepted practice in today's world, right? So we kind of just take it for granted and haven't really thought through, well, is contraception ethical? Should we do that as Christians? And so, like I just said and kind of laid out, ethically speaking, if we're holding to a natural law, we're going to say, no, we need to get America back to holding the way that God created the world. Therefore, contraception should not be practiced because it's preventing something that God originally ordered in the first place, which is not only sexual intercourse for the purpose of union and love between a man and a woman, but also the natural consequence of childbearing as well. So that was long and lengthy. Hopefully that made sense. Hopefully that kind of shows a little picture of how maybe somebody holding to natural law might think. But what are you guys' thoughts?
Well, and just to add a little bit onto that, there's also an emphasis in natural law on mechanics because it's there's kind of an emphasis on mechanics. In other words, the way that things work and the way that things should work. There is no division of what is good and what is bad between, let's say, like a believer and an unbeliever, right? Or based off of like certain reasonings, right? So you might say, if birth control is unethical, then it's not that the church should should abstain from it and then leave the world to decide for itself what it will do. The church, in order to restore the world, has to basically push this right thing to do, this right posture towards nature, in its politics and its decision making, which means that those who usually adhere to natural law would say that what's good is good for everybody. There is no distinction, and therefore things like I would imagine things like theonomy are pretty intimately tied in. Theonomy being the idea that God ought to rule, or God is the king, right? And that part of the church's mission is to establish God's kingdom through ethical practice. Basically, think Calvin's Geneva, right? It's a similar mindset, right? We'll create a city where everybody obeys God, and if not, we have to punish.
Go ahead, Nate.
So yeah, I was just gonna try and recap that. So basically, their natural law, to sum up, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but so there's a thought that God has ordered the world in a certain way, that he's and that's what makes it natural. So God has created the world, he's ordered it in a specific way, he's given certain processes, like he's made certain processes, and that's kind of the natural way that those things are formed, ultimately being formed by God, and so there's a good thing. So That's the realization of it, the thought of natural law. And then what Jacob, you said, is that there's also kind of an actionable, almost responsibility to pursue that in a way. So they tie natural law to God in that thought, and then they pursue it as well, and push might not be the right word, but advocate for a return to kind of that natural ordered existence.
Yeah. Morality is objective.
Yeah.
In this view, it's not just objective in that it exists, but you have to have a certain epistemology in order to get there. It's like it's objective, and everybody could be moral if they just followed the laws, right? Like they have to follow the laws. Now, you could argue that there are some that aren't actionable in the same way, so you could only get moral to a degree, but that it becomes this kind of pursuit, which is why you'll see like Catholics are some of the strongest advocates against abortion, against homosexuality, against birth control, all these things that they would consider as unnatural, and which they believe they have a responsibility to mitigate in the political sphere. I bring up Catholics because natural law is like one of the strongest tenets of Catholic theology. It's one of the greatest flavors because of Thomas Aquinas. So.
Yeah, I was just about to say, if people are more interested in natural law, there's a couple of things you could read, but particularly Thomas Aquinas is the one who kind of popularized this level of thought. It's interesting that you bring up theonomy, Jacob, because, I also had wondered about theonomy as I've taken the course and read some of the books as well. I also kind of, I loosely follow various people who are for theonomy just online and stuff like that, and listen to what they have to say. But anyways, no, I'm actually pretty sure natural law thinkers hate theonomy. I'm pretty convinced in that. And the reason being that they are, because the kind of the primary tenet of theonomy is that Mosaic law, not natural law per se, but Mosaic law as it's handed to Israel in the Mosaic covenant has to be enforced in civil unions today. Okay. So when you ask the question, how is it that we should create laws as a country, as a nation, the theonomist is going to say our laws have to be based off of the Mosaic law as Moses gave it in the Old Covenant. Now, of course, there's some disagreements amongst theonomists to exactly how that is to be done. I'm not going to go into that right now. But the reason I say that that causes conflict is because my professor, being an example, very, very staunchly against theonomy, has written multiple things against theonomy as a natural law proponent. And I've read some of his articles a bit as well. And the point being that the Mosaic law came as a particular covenant after the institution of the world. The natural order was instituted. And it was given specifically to Israel to identify them as a distinguished nation from amongst other nations because they have a special relationship with God. Okay, so is the Mosaic law in conflict with the natural order, the way that God ordered the world? Well, no, but that doesn't mean that we therefore have to take the covenant that was given to Israel and apply it as natural law today. So what natural law thinkers, and I'm just speaking kind of generally here, will say is that the Mosaic covenant was given to Israel. It was specific for them. We're under a new covenant under Christ today. And so Christ, acting as the mediator, has made it possible for us to return to the natural way that God has created the world, not just to return to it, but he's restored the natural way that God has ordered the world, so that human beings can clearly see and understand that natural order, I guess you could say. So this gets dicey and complicated. I've said a lot, so I kind of want to hear what you guys have to say, and hopefully I can clarify some more if I need to.
Yeah, no, that was a good clarification. I had forgotten the specific Mosaic bent of the traditional theonomists.
Yes.
Yeah, that was a good clarification. Thank you, Eric. I think I was more leaning towards the principle of divine law being objective and enforceable upon the world, right? That was the more my what would you say? That was more my emphasis there in linking natural law to theonomy. So I guess you could say theocracy. Theocracy would be, but not directly, right? Because that theocracy is just direct divine governance, but something, you know what I'm talking about? Like,
I think I kind of get the sentiment of what you're saying. I don't think a natural law person would like the way you're saying it, though.
That's fair, because I'm being inflammatory. Subtly so, but yes. Yes.
So I have a question now. You know, we've
Sure.
talked
Please.
about natural law, and you know, I think it's clear, and maybe it's not clear, but I mean, we see in Genesis that God creates the world. I mean, obviously he creates it in a specific way. He gives order to the chaos, right? The chaos was in the world, the darkness over the waters, and God provides light, he provides land, he provides life to flourish, or he provides the elements for life to flourish, and he orders it in this way. So I don't know if there's an argument against it, but I'd be curious to, what are the arguments against natural law? Where do those stem from? I'm not
this
sure
is where
if you're
Jacob
deep-
has to come in here, because I'm aware, although I have not read Karl Barth, who I believe is a staunch opponent of natural law. And correct me if I'm wrong, Jacob, but this is kind of the way I understand it at the moment. Barth is primarily pessimistic towards natural law because he thinks it puts too much emphasis upon human reason and not enough emphasis on human sinfulness and how that impacts the human's ability to reason in the first place.
Yeah, that's not far from it. I don't know that I would necessarily use Barth in my wandering away from natural law. I used to be pretty enamored with that idea, the natural law idea. I don't think that that's my main critique of it. I'm not really sure. So Barth's main bone to pick is with natural theology. So the idea that you can know who God is by studying the way that nature works, by studying human beings, by studying things that are, natural. We can somehow ascend beyond and transcend it into supernature, the knowledge of supernature. So
I see how that could rub
That
up
is-
against natural law, but I don't think it's directly opposed to it.
no, I don't think so. No, and I would say Barth talks a lot. Maybe it's more Bonhoeffer. I don't know. I'm still trying to read both of those guys. So, but I believe they both commonly refer to things as unnatural, and like that as a derogatory term, right? Like that unnatural, that the unnatural is by necessity wrong. I don't think that you can necessarily fully argue against natural law being the case, that there are certain ways of human flourishing, or there are certain ways of natural flourishing. There are teleological or purpose-driven mechanisms in creatures and in creation that lead to certain consequences when ignored. I just don't think that you can one for one map the consequences as ethical. So, for instance, let's see here. Okay, maybe a good example would be, it's hard. Let's
Forgive
see.
me, Jacob. I kind of cut out midway through your explanation there.
Oh, yeah. So I'll just keep going, and hopefully you'll catch it here. So,
Okay, perfect.
So to say something is sinful is to say that it does not proceed from faith. That's my understanding, or in terms of 1 John, it's lawlessness. Sin is it comes from lawlessness or a lack of faith, and I would say it is the posture that is unwilling to be governed specifically. The posture that says God is not that there is no God above me, or that the God above me that I choose is choosing a God to be above you that is not the true God. So, if that's the case, I would say that to do something that is contrary to nature does not mean that you are sinning. So that's where I would say that the ethical and the consequential don't fully align. So it's not because homosexuality is unnatural that it is wrong, but because it is disobedient. It's disobedient to the God who says, right? So a great example of this, actually, I just figured one out that would be good. If the Mosaic Law is not contrary to nature, then there would be no reason for, to nature. There would be no reason for circumcision. Circumcision would be something actually unnatural, right? It is cutting off a piece of the body that is clearly meant to be there, right? However, God, one of the first commands in Abraham's tenure with God is to be circumcised. There are times where the natural is violated, but not to the effect of sinfulness. So maybe this is the bigger thing, Eric, is that my critique of natural law is that it is eisegetic. It reads ethics into the mechanisms of what we could perceive of as nature. But we are unclear, like when we ask, let's say, why is homosexuality unnatural? We can say, well, because it doesn't lead to birth. But neither does certain types of unmarried sex. I'm sorry, married sex, not unmarried sex. Certain types of married sex. But we wouldn't necessarily say that in every case those types of sex are wrong. And so I think it falls apart. You have this this mapping of the ethical onto only certain mechanisms, and it seems that the mechanisms are prejudiced against. There are biases in which things, which mechanisms of nature or mechanisms of nature are considered unethical.
Let me hop in here. Maybe part of me thinks what you're saying there is missing the point of natural law a little bit, and let's see if I'm correct in saying that, if I'm understanding you rightly. Let's give that example of homosexuality. Or no. Let's give the example of homosexuality specifically not leading to what is natural, I guess you could say, or is the way you put it. I don't think that's in conflict with what a natural law person who holds to natural law is saying, because it does seem to be the case that in Genesis there is a natural way in which God ordered sex, and union between people in that sort of way. And your concern seems to be for the folks who don't naturally fit into that category. But I don't think a natural law person is trying to exclude those people. I think they're willing to say that in those circumstances, there has to be, specifically for the unmarried couple who's unable to conceive or something like that, there has to be grace there for those people, and they can live out God's natural design in other ways. But the effects of the fall and sin has marred natural law in some sort of way, I think, is how they would put it. So I still
then
think...
what okay, so hold that thought then.
Yeah, go ahead.
If nature is flawed or fallen, and therefore natural law is shifted or altered,
Human nature.
what is just human nature, or is all nature broken?
Oh, good question. I think actually they probably would say all. Probably all.
So here's a question: can we eat animals?
Good question.
Is it natural? That's a better question. Is it natural to eat animals? For humans to eat animals?
I would have to look over. I think probably yes, because God instituted dominion over them.
So just to
where
quick
they would
clarify,
probably go.
So when we say natural, we're referring to is it in line with the way that God ordered the world when he created it? Is that right?
Right.
In the first place,
Okay.
yes.
Okay, gotcha. So I just want to clarify between natural.
yeah.
I feel like natural has
When
its
we-
own connotations and
When
words,
we
so,
say
let's rock
when
with
we
that.
say natural moving forward, we're talking about the way God ordered the world in the first place. Okay. So, anyways, is it natural to eat animals? I haven't touched that topic yet, and I haven't really thought about it much, so I'm not sure. But I would imagine the first place they would go is God's institution of human beings having dominion over the earth, and I think that includes the animals as well. Adam names the animals and clearly has a unique authority over them in being in the image of God, having the Imago Dei. So I see it as plausible to argue from that stance that likely it would have been okay to eat animals. From that, I'll let you respond to that, and then maybe we can go further.
Yeah, I mean, I've never heard that interpretation before. It's an interesting one. But my case being there that traditionally people would say that it was under Noah and the results of the Noahic covenant that we were permitted to eat meat. That meat was not on the menu, let's say, before that point.
Yeah.
So the question then becomes, okay, so God has instituted a new law or a new way that humans can interact with nature, but it is so clearly bound up with the fallenness of the world. And so do we follow that one, or do we follow the prior order, which would be the more perfect of the two? And I think that's where things get kind of dicey.
Yeah.
But it's in things like that. So that would maybe be a good example. I'm not the greatest at coming up with examples on the fly. But it's those kinds of things. I think there's a heavy reading of what is right and wrong, or what is natural and unnatural, that perhaps, I don't know, I would say it's an overblown definition. Like there are times where it's like, I'm unsure that's the case, that is natural.
Maybe this would be helpful. Let me ask you this. Is there... Well, let me back it way up. Is there anything that is natural, that's obvious from the way that God created the world to human nature? Is there a particular
Sorry,
way
say that one more time?
Is there a particular way that God created the world, that God ordered the world that is obvious, I guess?
And I think there's the key.
Which is why I asked it, I think.
I would say there is I would say all of Scripture is a type and a shadow. So I would say, especially when we're talking Genesis, Exodus, the Torah, right? I think we're talking in terms of shadows. So, for instance, I do think that there is a mandate to be fruitful and multiply, but I think that the Great Commission is the secondary giving, the spiritual secondary. It's the kingdom institution. It's the melding of heaven on earth for what it means for us to be fruitful and multiply. So I don't. That's why I think that when Jesus says that it is better for you not to be married, for those who can accept it, and when Paul says, "I wish all that were as I am," I think they can say that without questioning whether or not the original purpose or mandate to be fruitful and multiply might say something opposite, right? I don't think that.
Like they would say that it's natural for man to leave his father and mother and cling to a woman. So if you're being celibate, then you're opposing natural law. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah. Or specifically that it is natural for us to be fruitful and multiply, and that you cannot do that if you are single. But both of them were single. Both Jesus and Paul were single. So I would say there are ways in which the human telos has been spiritualized or abstracted away from, like I said, it's shadows, right? So it's Genesis is a shadow of human nature, or the way that the world should be. But I don't know that everything is. I wouldn't push strongly into a protological primacy, meaning that the first things, or the original state of things, is the best state that we are trying to get back to. I don't actually think that we are trying to get to Eden. I don't think we're trying to get back to Eden. I don't think that's what the story of Scriptures is telling. I think it's the story of Eden being transcended, and of Eden leading to the fall, but the fall leading us through our, what Origen would call our falling down, right? Our coming down out of our perfection into something greater, Zion, the new Jerusalem, which is far better. Notice it's a city, not a garden, right? There are changes and subtle shifts in the way that our eschatology treats our protology, right, or engages with our protology. There are subtle shifts. So I would say there are themes, right? There are analogies. There are resonancies between the way that things were in the beginning and the way that things will be in the end, that should be in the end, but that those two are not identical.
Okay.
So I think one way to say that, another way is we can look at Genesis and in the beginnings at how God has ordered the world, and yet we need to read that as Christians. We need to read that in light of the New Testament and of the gospel and of the revelation of Jesus Christ, because we're not trying to return to Eden, and we're not trying to distill the laws and the order that we see there. We're not trying to recreate that, but we're trying to move forward into what God has planned for us, and that has been revealed to us by Jesus. And so we can't return to that, but we have to move through time, and we have to read that ordered existence by what we see in Jesus in order to continue. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
That's right.
I think I partly agree. Maybe no, I probably shouldn't even say it that way. I think I agree, but I think it stops short what you're saying. Let me keep going, because this is really interesting. This is intriguing. Let me ask this question, because I think it'll get at where my objection is coming from.
Mm-hmm.
Again, let's go back to the example of homosexuality.
Sure.
Before there was a Mosaic covenant, before there was any covenant, Abrahamic covenant, was homosexuality wrong? Was it sinful?
before there was a Mosaic covenant.
Any covenant.
Whether or not it was evil is that's a really good question. I would say I'm trying to remember. I think it's in Romans. Doesn't Paul basically say that before there is law, there is no
Yes, I believe it's Romans 1.
Yeah, so I would say, in the same sense that we would say that the incest that we see throughout Scripture is not wrong in the days of the patriarchs because they don't have a law saying that it's wrong. I would say I'd be inconclusive. I don't know.
That's where I think natural law comes into play. I think it's wrong because it was against the natural order that God created the world, and it bends the good way in which He created it. So, one big objection, you kind of hit part of it there, but one big objection by non-believers to Christians is that we're hypocritical because you read the Old Testament and there's so much polygamy as it goes throughout it. When you read the New Testament and it's so clear that monogamous marriage is the standard, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's where I would say it was wrong and it was sinful for folks throughout the Old Testament to be polygamous because it was against the way that God ordered the world, and that's where Genesis would come in play, where man leaves his father and mother to cling to a woman. There was one woman in the beginning to cling to one. There were not multiple. But God, as time progresses and as the fall comes into play, can give grace and work through human sinfulness and brokenness as they're impacted by culture and things around them, and not condone those things, but still accomplish His will despite those things. I just don't see how you get around that. I'm not comfortable saying I'm inconclusive, I guess, in that manner, because I think has to be a way in which people are held responsible for sin apart from covenant.
Yeah. Let me reset the stage then, or clarify. Let me clarify what I meant.
Go ahead.
I do believe that that nature is a thing. I'm not saying that there's no such thing as nature. I think that to equate No. I would say to equate what is unnatural with what is unethical is the key problem. I don't think that in every case, and even beyond that, I can say what is unethical and what is unnatural sometimes and oftentimes overlap. Okay? Unnatural and unethical overlap. But they are not, it's not a causal relationship. It's not like because it's unnatural, it is wrong. That's my problem with natural law, is that it seems to me that there's a great deal of things that are unnatural that we are unwilling to call wrong. But so then there's this kind of playing of prejudice, this bias.
Hold on, time out. I don't want to lose the thought here.
Okay.
Because I don't think that's what natural law folks are saying. I don't think they're saying it's causal. I think they're saying it's synonymous. I think it's...
Yeah, I wouldn't say that either.
Like you personally or from the natural law camp?
Sorry, I would not say it's synonymous either. Okay. I would say they sometimes overlap.
I like to think in examples. So to go along Jacob, with your I was thinking of one. I'll pose one, and Jacob, feel free to pose another. But something that would be disordered, at least what we see in Genesis, we see plenty of animals. I don't know, to my knowledge, I don't think that we see animals killing and eating one another. So that might be, let's just take that as an example. So that's ordered. Mm-hmm. God has created these animals to live together and for them to not be predators, prey, and food for one another. But what we see in the world is a disordering of that relationship, where some animals are predators, some are prey, they kill and they eat each other. That's disordered from what we see, but that doesn't mean that it's technically unethical. That doesn't mean it's wrong for them to do that, but it is a disordering of what was originally.
Sure.
Okay.
Great. Yeah. Good example. And you know, you might get the pushback. It's a good example, so I'll give you that. The obvious problem with this one is there's no moral agents involved, right? The animals have never been moral agents, right? But I think that example is a good one, right? It sets the analogy well, right? Of like the fact of unnaturality does not necessitate that something is unethical. So for another instance would be like this perhaps is also a bad example. A lot of these are just bad examples. I think it's kind of hard.
It's hard to fully encapsulate the whole issue into one example.
But disease is unnatural, right? In the sense that it's not what was intended, right? The what's the word? Not symbiotic, the opposite, right? So it's like when something's living off something else, right? But it's like parasitic. Thank you. Thank you, brain.
You're
finally.
welcome. I didn't do anything, but
I was gonna say I don't know why I said thank you.
Jacob is
parasitical.
so courteous.
Yeah. The parasitical relationship between disease and human kind is unnatural. It doesn't necessarily make it unethical, right? And again, you could say this may be the same problem because the primary actor is also not a moral agent, right?
So maybe this might be the...
Here's a good...
Go ahead.
I got it. I got I got the example. Okay, so if I choose to eat lead, or if I choose to eat something unedible, you could say that's unnatural. And pretty clearly so. Your body will tell you pretty quickly that that's unnatural, right? For you to eat something that's not meant to be eaten, you could say. That doesn't make it unethical. And I'm the actor in that one, right? I think that's the key. There's a good one.
An interesting relationship. Yeah, that is a good example.
Yeah.
So I think to say it's synonymous is, I think, overblown. I think we don't actually act that way, right? I don't think we actually make moral judgments that way, and I think it falls apart at some point.
Okay. Yeah, this is interesting to continue thinking about, because I've wondered like how you combat natural law. Like what would like somebody who doesn't like natural law, like what would they say?
Well, that's what I've been wondering too. You know, and that's kind of why I posed the question: what would people who argue against natural law say? Because I mean, when you think about it in terms of order and disorder, we see God create order in the beginning. You know, he creates the earth in such a way for it to exist and for life to flourish, and yet it's disordered too. You know, we see even, you know, I think natural disasters is a good example of the way that the earth itself is, you know, can cause destruction and chaos, and it's disordered in that way. You know, it's kind of broken and fallen.
Yeah.
So, but I wonder what somebody else would, you know, I don't know if somebody who opposes natural law would fully, and granted, I'm totally speculating here, so I don't know the answer, but I wonder if they would completely reject the entire idea of order versus disorder. You know, but I find it hard to argue with kind of what you're saying, Eric. I mean, we see it in Scripture, so I wonder what a proponent would say.
Yeah,
against natural law.
I have two questions. I'm trying to think of which one I should ask. Maybe I'll ask this one because I kind of forgot the second one, and maybe it'll come back to me.
Okay.
So, Because I got to keep pressing this, Jacob. Oh yeah, I was just
Sure.
going to sum up what you were going to say to make sure I'm understanding you properly. You
Sure.
would say that there is a natural order to the way God ordered the world, but it just like maybe because of the fall, it doesn't entirely line up nowadays. Is that like a simplistic way to put what you're saying?
Well, I think that's I don't think that I think that that would be whether you believe in natural law or not. That's true, right? Like I think it would be hard to argue against that from a scriptural standpoint. What else is the creation groaning, right? There's obviously something different about nature because of the fall. So I don't know that that's necessarily the point that I die on. The part that I would say the thing that I find makes me uneasy about natural law. The thing that I find uneasy about natural law is that it equates nature, whether you talk about nature as post-fall or pre-fall, it equates nature with ethics. What is natural is ethical. And I think that that's not the case in every...
Because nature has changed? Is that where you're coming from?
Because nature isn't a determiner of morality. Okay. I just don't think that I said, there's not a causal relationship.
What's your justification for saying that? Like, why should I believe
that?
And just to clarify, the natural here, is it still referring to God's ordering of the world or the natural world?
Yes, I think
both?
to both of those. Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
Both.
Okay.
So I guess you could say to some degree, maybe another pushback would be that nature, because of the fall and because none of us lived before the fall, there are aspects of nature that could have shifted because of the fall that we have no idea. Like, some people have argued that rain is a post-fall phenomena that would not have been, right, because it hadn't rained until Noah. And so, like, is rain unnatural? It's like, I don't know. That's, like, you get into these weird questions. So there's a part of me that wonders, do we even know what nature truly is? But even arguing, let's say that we do, or even just arguing from Genesis as like a grounds for morality, I would just say I don't see morality as mechanical in that way. I don't see morality as falling in line with nature. I just don't. I don't think that they're one and the same. I don't think that you can say that sin is a result of acting in a way that is unnatural.
Okay.
And I would say maybe a great example of this is the incarnation. The incarnation, and specifically the crucifixion, is unnatural. God dying is unnatural. Like, pretty unnatural, right? For God to die. And yet, that is the salvific point, right? That is the moment of redemption for us. So I would say, it is unnatural, and it is, I don't know if you could say ethical. It is, it's the, but God does the right thing.
Wasn't it unnatural in order to redeem that which is natural?
Say that one more time.
Wasn't it unnatural so that he could redeem, actually not that which is natural, that which is unnatural?
God it might have been, but that's still, if it's synonymous, then God sins. If it's synonymous, then the non-natural would be the non-ethical.
Okay.
But it's not true that it's
because
not
it wouldn't have been ethical for God to become incarnate, because that's not natural. But
and that's not even the biggest thing. Like, the death of God
lost. I think we're getting lost in the language a little bit here, because
we might be.
I think Something doesn't feel
And
right to me.
And it may be that I have an anemic understanding of natural law. I would not be surprised if my natural law understanding is off.
It's hard, man. Like it is simple and like the way it presents itself, but it's the application of it where it gets complicated. And I think that's why this conversation is complicated. So
do you have scripture to back it up? Like,
Yeah.
could you point to scripture and say, here's where Paul says that what is unnatural is unethical?
Yeah, I think it's Romans 1. I'm not going to go searching for it right now because I know it's there. I'm just going to generally say it.
Romans 1 is a good place to start, for sure.
Because it's somewhere in Romans. I'm forgetting which chapter specifically. I believe it's Romans 1. In Paul's discussion of how are the Gentiles held accountable apart from covenant, basically, because they're not the covenant people of God. On what basis? So the classic question that people, non-believers, will usually ask Christians is, how is it fair that people who've never heard of Jesus or never heard the gospel are sent to hell? Right? How is that fair?
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of what the natural law person is going to say is they're going to point to Paul and say that maybe I should be pulling up Romans 1. Because the law is written on their hearts, therefore they're held accountable to God. And
I think that part's Romans 2.
Yeah, it could be.
I think it's beginning of Romans 2. Let's see.
But
the Jews in the law. Oh no, it's the end. It's the end, I think.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
hold on.
You
there we go.
You look for that. Yeah, go ahead. If you got it.
2:14. Indeed, when Gentiles who do not have the law do by nature things required by the law, they are a law for themselves, even though they do not have the law. They show that the requirements of the law are written on their hearts, their consciences also bearing witness, and their thoughts sometimes accusing them, and at other times even defending them. So I think he doesn't.
Right. So let me.
He doesn't say they follow the natural law. He just says they follow the law, which in almost every case is a reference to Torah. So he's saying, I think he's saying they are fulfilling Torah.
What verse is this, Jacob?
2:14.
2:14.
Romans 2:14.
Okay. Yeah, so, but hold on. They don't, what Paul's saying here, for the Gentiles, they don't have the law. They're not under Mosaic covenant, right? But they do,
well,
they can still do good because by nature they do what the law requires, right?
So
by their very nature. They,
yes.
the part where it says
But
they
that
are a
doesn't...
law unto themselves means that they create, like, because they're apart from God's law, they create their own law for themselves. That's why they're immoral, is because they've done that which is of their own accord, I think, is what.
Well, no, they don't create a law. They show that the requirements of the law are written on their hearts. Mm-hmm. So they're I'm saying I think that what Torah is trying to get at, which Jesus clarifies for us, is the love of God and the love of neighbor. What Torah is trying to aim towards is what the Gentiles are doing. It's not that they're following some sort of, like external laws, or like they're reverting back to their original operating system or something. I think they are somehow, and it's unclear how they do this, right? But they are somehow fulfilling the law. They are acting as a law to themselves.
Yes, because
so they are fulfilling the law without knowing the law.
Yes, because it's written on their hearts.
Right.
That is the essence of what natural law is, I think. So when
But-
it says
but
next
again-
in verse 15, they show that the work of the law is written on their hearts, while their conscience also bears witness, and their conflicting thoughts accuse or even excuse them.
Yeah.
And then so on. I won't read that last part.
Yeah, so I hear where you could get a natural law here, right? Like you could make the inference, right? Okay, so within their very natures, right? Because that's not an external law, it's an internal law. An internal law has to come from nature. So because they have an internal law that points them towards the good that the law of the Jews points them towards, they act as a law to themselves, right? But I don't think that, okay, so here's what I'm missing. What I'm missing is the way that nature tends, or the things that are in accordance with the way that God created things originally, is what either of those laws are trying to point towards. That's missing for me.
I'm losing
The
you a little
correlation of the ethical and the nomic. I'm sorry, the ethical and the natural. So what I'm saying is, he doesn't say here, the Gentiles show that they are a law unto themselves by not committing homosexuality, or by doing, like, what I'm saying is, he's not giving as an example things that, like, the principles of nature as the ends of the law. The principles of nature are not what the law is pointing towards. That's the thing that I'm missing here. He doesn't seem to be saying that, or I don't know where that is a crucial proposition to uphold natural law from this passage, but that proposition I do not see. Does that make sense?
I think so.
Okay.
Is there any simpler of a way you could put it that might clarify it more? for me?
The law. So, in order for natural law to make sense from this passage,
Yes.
I think what I would need to hear is something akin to the spirit of, the law points to Eden, and because the Gentiles live according to Edenic principles, they are a law unto themselves. But that's not what it says. It says that they do what the law requires, but that has nothing to do with the principles of nature. That has to do, at least if we interpret this with Jesus's words in mind, the thing that the law requires is the love of neighbor, right? It's loving your neighbor as yourself.
Maybe the breakdown, Jacob, is a misunderstanding of Eden in and of itself. I don't. Let me say this and see. Maybe I'm just misreading you. Eden wasn't good because God said so after the fact. It was good as God made it. And when God said it was good, like, he didn't, like, make it and it was neutral and then it was good. He made it was good, and God, as he's finished, says it's good.
Mm-hmm.
So
I agree.
yeah, so, like, it kind of feels like when we're talking about it, like, you're saying that God has declared something good, and this is where it's breaking down a little bit for me, and I'm just not sure. God has declared
Keep
something good, and because of the fall, it, like, becomes unclear when we apply ethics, I suppose. No.
No. I would say the integral goodness of creation is its relationship to God. It's obedient. The creation is obedient. It is as he says it should be. That doesn't mean that... Okay, and there's maybe the dividing line is, I don't think it's because God made it according to certain principles, and those principles are good. And that's why nature is good, is because the trees are the color that trees are supposed to be, and the fruits are being bared out in the seasons that they're supposed to be bared out in. It's not because of the principles, it's because of the relationship that creation bears, or the relationship that creation holds with God. It is the obedience. That is the key. And actually, it's funny, I was just editing episode 10 where we talk about the Athanasian Creed, and I think that this is actually a very similar dynamic to the problem that you had with me saying that faith is more of a posture than it is like specific contents of epistemology. That like it is certain propositions held to, right? There is I think the difference between you and me is that I think that your conception is that there are this would be a good way of clarifying it. There are objective goods, and I would say there is objective good, but that objective good is God Himself and the relationship that you bear to God. Objective
Not
goods,
just the
there is nothing good in and of
principles
itself.
order.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's not that the tree is green, or sorry, it's not because the tree is green that it is good. The tree is good because God has called it good. It bears a relationship of goodness to God. It's obedient.
And so, Jacob, take that one step further to Paul in Romans talking about the law on people's hearts without knowing the law. Well, taking that
They
principle,
love neighbor and they love God, which is, I think that, again, if you're going to ask Paul what the requirements of the law are, he's going to say to love your neighbor and to love God, right? Or else he's probably at variance with Jesus. And I believe there's actually parts where he does say that.
But hold on. Okay, hold on. Let me, because again, I think I'm seeing.
So I'm not just talking out of my butt.
I think I'm seeing the breakdown. I'm not saying that we should do it for the principles' sake of being principles. Like the natural law person is going to say these things ought to be pursued because they're good in and of themselves, because God intrinsically made them that way. And I feel like you're saying that God declared them that way afterwards. They were some sort of neutral until God said so. And I don't think that's the case. I don't like they're objectively good because they're intrinsically valuable in the way that God created them to be.
They were good because they were faithful. They were in allegiance, in line with God. They responded with obedience.
Who's they?
All of creation.
All of creation. So they're like that's a weird way.
I think you guys are actually saying something similar because, Eric, what you're saying is that it's
but their
not
response to God is a consequence of their natural design that He made them to be. Like, you're speaking of consequences, and I'm talking about intrinsic value.
Okay. Say that another way.
Yeah, so you're saying, like, nature is good because of the way in which they respond to God. I'm saying nature is good because God intrinsically made it that way. They were created good.
I don't think creation is intrinsically good.
Well, post fall, there's brokenness in it.
No, I don't think it ever was.
Yeah,
intrinsically good.
That's so. Yeah, when God created the heavens and the earth, and he called it good, you just think it was neutral, and then it was good, right?
Well, there is only one good, and it is God. God is the only one, right? Jesus says that. Good teacher, the rich young ruler, says to him, and he says, "Why do you call me good? No one is good but God alone," right?
I think that's taking that example too far, but I like.
Is
God
there
can't,
okay?
God can't delegate goodness to His creation, like
He can't. He can, but it ceases to be good the moment that it is no longer obedient.
Right, but it was intrinsic. Like, okay, so this is going to get into the Imago Dei here, right? Is humanity intrinsically good and valuable? Maybe good isn't the proper word to be using here, but in the beginning was humanity created intrinsically good, or were they in some sort of weird neutral state? And then God created
there
them?
is no such thing as intrinsic. To say something is intrinsic is to separate it from its creator. But the creator is the only one that gives good, the only one that defines good.
Right. You're saying
it almost feels like you're asking me, can something be good even if God doesn't say it's good?
no.
And I'm like, no.
That's not what I'm saying. No. I think I'm understanding you clearly here. I could be wrong, but
Keep going.
yeah, you're saying again that it's good because God said so, but I'm saying it's good because God made it so, like in its very essence, and then it's straight away.
Yeah.
Christ restores that and makes it better.
Yes. I think maybe it's
So
where
there was-
language is breaking down, but yeah, I think I agree with that.
Yeah, so I'm not saying I don't buy that God made everything neutral in the beginning. He made the heavens and the earth and it was neutral. And then he said it was good. I'm saying God made it good.
No, it's good because it obeys.
I think that's a natural consequence of the way in which God made it. It strays away, Christ restores that. That's what natural law is saying.
I think that goodness, the only way that goodness is communicable to that which is not intrinsically good, which would be everything that's not God, is for it to be in allegiance to or united with God. Not united in essence, obviously, but united in the sense of allegiance. And I think that is what the creation was, is it was in allegiance with God. So that is a very,
So human beings...
I don't know what the word is for that. But.
Human beings that are not in correct union with God are not intrinsically valuable.
We switched words. So they're not good.
Yeah, and
they're not intrinsically
good. I think language is breaking down here a bit, and I see why you said that.
So what about the serpent though? Because the serpent was a manifestation, like he was a character of evil in the garden, but
Sure.
he was also created by God. And so if God only creates good, how can the serpent become?
Yeah, that gets into...
That's a standout for me.
Yeah, that gets into...
That's fair.
I think that there's... I have not studied this very well, but
No,
loosely,
definitely.
Loosely, my
But I
understanding
think
is
that's
that there was a pre-fall fall in a spiritual realm where Satan and the demons were cast down for...
Right, but I think that would go in favor of Jacob's point that creation was good because it obeyed. And the moment that creation stopped obeying was the moment that it was in opposition to God. And we see that fallout because there is evil even in the garden.
Yeah, but Satan is evil because he rebelled against God, but that doesn't mean that Satan wasn't created like his former name Lucifer. Like that doesn't mean that he wasn't good, like created in a good sense before he fell. It's the same thing as what we're saying with human beings here. Like human beings are valuable because God made them that way, and they're bad as they sin and fall away, and Christ restores that. So
is it possible that this is a both and rather than a either or? God both creates good,
that's what I'm
and
saying.
Things are good until they rebel. I think that's a merging of both your guys' point.
Well, that's what I think I'm saying, but I'm not sure that Jacob is saying that. Like I'm saying, God has made. I'll switch and I'll try to use the term value instead. God made humans valuable from the very beginning, or like they have a certain.
I don't like valuable. I think
that
valuable.
sounds wrong. Yeah,
moves
that sounded
towards
wrong coming off the
economic.
tongue. Yeah.
Yeah.
all right.
Consuming. Yes, it's like consumerism has entered the theological chat.
Yeah, I agree. That sounded wrong. Just leaving my tongue.
I think maybe so here's a good example.
Like I'm using good as a term like valuable. You're using good as a term like moral. Is what I'm saying.
I don't know if it matters how you use it. So let me give an example. If somebody is compelled by government force to abstain from sex before marriage, did they do something good?
Good question.
So there's no such thing as like they're not a moral agent.
Let me clarify. Who's the they that you're speaking of? The government?
No.
The person abstaining.
The person abstaining. Did they do something moral by being
if they were
compelled
forced
by the
to
government?
not do it.
Yeah.
Okay. So if somebody is forced to do something, is it moral?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Even if the thing is good. That's a good question.
Yeah,
I think this gets right to the heart of it.
Yeah, I think maybe I'd have to think about this more, but my initial inclination is yes, but it's not pleasing to God. In the same way that I would say like people can do moral things that are morally good but not pleasing to God.
Because
in the same
they
way
have
that I would
spite in their heart.
Yes. So like the perfect example I think of this that I was talking about with Aaliyah is like two non-believers getting married is morally good and in line with natural law. But it's not pleasing to God because they're doing it for other reasons other than for God's sake.
So
Interesting.
you're bifurcating good in a weird way, or not in a weird way. I'm sorry, that was derogatory.
No, that's okay.
You're bifurcating good in a way that I haven't heard before. You're saying that there are times where the good can be wrong. The good thing is the wrong thing.
I don't think that's the right way to put it. No.
So the good always is right.
The good always is right.
So in that example of two non-believers getting married, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing?
The marriage itself is a good thing. Marriage is good. It's a part of the way that God instituted human beings to operate. And in that sense, it's good. Okay. Sorry, guys. I cut out there for a moment. Phone and computer died at the same time. So hopefully I'm going to get back on track where we are here. Yeah, big L.
we can't let this conversation die like that. We have to come to a close.
So your question was about, or you wanted me to speak further on the two married couple. Is that right? Or the married couple?
Sure. I think we were right at the point where you were saying that the good. The question I was asking is the good ever wrong? Is the good, achieving the good, the wrong thing? Morally wrong.
Yeah, and I'm just I would have to think about that more. I'm just not sure that's the right way to phrase the correct way to phrase the question. It might be missing something there. I'd have to think about the way you asked that. But like, let me talk about the married couple who are two non-believers further, and maybe that can clarify something.
Okay.
So what I'm saying and what natural law I think is saying at its basic tenet is that some things should be pursued because they are good in and of themselves because God made it that way. marriage would be one of those things. However, due to the fall, like we wouldn't say as Christians, two non-believers shouldn't get married because they're not Christians. What we are saying is that they can, and it's good because God made marriage good, but their marriage isn't going to be pleasing to God because they're doing it according to improper motives, whether it be they're doing it just because they really like their spouse, they're doing it because it improves their social situation, they're doing it because it will give them more financial gain, whatever the case may be. None of the reasons in which two non-believers are getting married is because it's for God, because they want to glorify and honor God. And that's why it's not pleasing to him. So the marriage, the fact that there is a marriage in and of itself is good because it's part of God's created order. But as that marriage, like the motives behind it and as it plays out in real time will be not good because it's coming at it from a rebellious notion, I guess you could say, a rebellious intent. Does that make sense?
So, yeah, I think it does. And here's where actually this is we've hit, I think, at a very, very upstream difference between you and me. And I don't know, Nate, I'm not sure where you're at with all this, but I think me and Eric are at variance. I think me and Eric are at variance in this, and I think it's very upstream because this is basically where I get my politics from as well. I would say the political. Yeah. Eric does not like my politics, and if he's a proponent of natural law, then it makes sense why he doesn't like my politics. Because my politics would say it doesn't matter what the nation does. It's always wrong until it is faithful. So unless it believes, it doesn't, like, nothing it does matters, right? So for instance, you could say it has negative ramifications for the like it can hurt people, right? But I would say Jesus didn't seem all that concerned about the world hurting people. He kind of let it kill him. And he told all of his disciples, like, it's going to kill you too. And he didn't say to his disciples, so work your extra hardest so that you can change the world so it won't hurt you anymore. He kind of seemed to think that there was something endemic about the world, something very, you could say, intrinsic about the world. Yeah, natural. Within the world that it was going to reject him and his followers,
that's
right?
Not where I thought
so
you were going, but okay, go ahead.
Yes, yeah. So I would actually say that in most cases, nature is wrong. Nature, because it has decapitated itself, because it is no longer obedient, it's a false good. It's idolatry, right? So it's trying to set itself up as an end, but it's not. It's not the true end. The only end is God, and so the only good end is God.
Yeah.
So
that's
everything else is death.
Yeah, and I would say
no matter what it
I would
looks
say
like.
that's because it's straight away from the natural way in which God created it in the first place. So it's like,
but like the trees still grow.
Nature didn't like entirely lose or shift to like something entirely different, you could say. Like for you and I both believe in total depravity. Like we're not saying utter depravity, like humans are as sinful as they can be all the time, no matter what. Like there's still resonance of something.
I would come close to that.
I'm sure, speaking further on this topic, it wouldn't surprise me if you did. But I'm saying, I'm saying I don't think that to be the case. And I think I'm comfortable with leaving it there and what I've said so far. If you want to say a little more.
Cool. No, I'm happy. This is a great conversation.
Yeah,
I think like this is.
I think this might be a good pausing point for us to maybe pick up a conversation on natural law and morals and ethics as well.
Yeah.
And especially how we Christians ought to live in this world. in light of the way that God has ordered it in the past, and in light of the New Testament revelation in Jesus Christ. Yeah. Any closing remarks from y'all?
Just a quick clarifier. When I said my politics basically say that everything the world does is wrong, I will say I do have a political stance, and my political stance is that we should preach Christ and Christ crucified to everybody, because that's the only way that we enter upon life. So it's not like I'm saying, well, the world's going to hell in a handbasket, just abandon it and go move to the desert. Like, even that can
You don't
be
want to be. You
bad.
don't want to live the monastic lifestyle, Jacob. That's what you're telling me.
I may or may not want to be a monk, but that doesn't have any bearing on this conversation. That's important. So, like, you know, where some people would be like, you know, like, well, we gotta, you know, we have to end the evils that this world is doing. I would stay with Bonhoeffer and say, let the world be the world. We have to let the world be the world, and we have to be always preaching and rebuking the world, and calling it to Christ, because that's where its true life will be.
You just said some things.
And we
So
will
just
pick
a
that up
capstone.
later. We will pick that up later on the next episode.
Nate wants to go home.
Next conversation.
This
We
is
are
great.
at an hour and a half now,
we need to stop.
I have so appreciated this conversation. I want to thank my co-hosts,
Nate.
Jacob Hawley and Eric Burgers, and hey, I'm just so thankful. If you've listened this long, man, you're a real one. So I appreciate you listening. We love you all, and we pray every day that Christ be exalted. Thanks, y'all. See you again in the next one.